So hi, everybody. Welcome, and thank you to Intu for having me. I'm really excited to be back here speaking with you all. My name is Leah Knoll, and I am the program manager for the Center for Learning and Academic Success here at Suffolk. You'll often hear our office referred to across campus as the CLAS. So if you happen to hear those acronyms or the letter CLAS, just know, that we're one and the same. And we really handle a lot of the academic support services that are on campus. I know that you've already received, a general overview of CLAS services a few weeks ago at your orientation. So I won't spend, very much time talking about that, as it seems like, a lot of you are already familiar with what we do and really how we aim to support students. I do just want to quickly highlight, 3 of our services that are available to you over the summer. They were probably mentioned to you during orientation, but I do think it's a great refresher since I have you as a captive audience. We offer in the CLAS one-on-one content tutoring. So, sorry, Lisa, I see your message. Yes, I can. So we offer one-on-one content tutoring for a variety of different courses. And over the summer, we currently have about 250 courses that we offer one-on-one support for. So if you are taking courses over the summer and you feel like you might benefit from working with a content tutor, then we definitely want you to stop by and see us. And even if the course that you're taking is not listed in those 250, Suffolk courses that we have, that doesn't mean that we don't have people here to support you. So we want you to stop by too. The other thing that I just wanted to take a quick moment to tell you about is our writing services. So if you are working in a class, when you have a paper or writing assignment that you feel like you'd benefit from showing a writing tutor, then that is happening all summer long, and you certainly have the opportunity to do that. We encourage you to. And the very last one I just want to highlight before I jump into introducing our topic is our English language workshops. So our English language workshops happen throughout the academic year, but they're also taking place over the summer. And during the summer, we have 2 workshops that are taking place. You do not need an appointment for those. You can just come on down and log in as long as you're trying to log in at the times that they're being held. We have a conversation workshop where you can practice just conversation skills. That's happening with Sue Brody on Mondays. And we also have a grammar workshop that happens with one of our professional tutors named Paul, and that goes on every Thursdays. So again, these are happening all summer long. We encourage you to stop in online and take advantages of those services if you think they would be helpful. So for the next hour, we're gonna be talking about the topic of academic honesty in the context of the American university setting. And we chose to kick off this summer semester with this workshop, not only because of how important of a topic academic honesty is for all students, but because there are parts of it that really can just be confusing for students for lots of different reasons. This is especially true for students that are still learning how to navigate the ins and outs of the American education system. And for those that may not be completely familiar with this concept of academic honesty or the expectations that the university has, it can, be a little bit overwhelming at times, and it definitely warrants a good overview. So the plan for us today is really to just use our time together to open up a conversation, to share with you some information regarding the different academic standards at Suffolk, and really look at what academic honesty is and how you might be able to avoid any potential missteps during your time as a student. Okay, so we would rather have those conversations now while they're low stakes, as opposed to when, or if some type of academic issue or academic misconduct arises. So that's really the goal for today. So before we can really get into everything that is academic honesty, I just want to spend a few minutes just talking about where this emphasis on academic honesty in education came from. How did this come to be? So you might be looking at this picture and you must be wondering, where I could possibly be going with this. But the idea of academic honesty is something that goes back all the way to the Western frontier. And if you're not familiar with the concept of the American Western frontier, that is okay. It was really just a period in the United States that was heavily rooted in the idea of westward expansion, okay? And not only just in the physical sense of getting new land, but it was also about the welcoming of new thoughts and new ideas. Okay, so that was a big part during this time. There was also a really large emphasis put on individualism and self-reliance. And you'll still find a lot of those values in different US systems that still exist today. And if you look at the United States, and its education system, you're still gonna find a lot of these structures and systems that put this emphasis on individualism, the pursuit of new ideas, and having ownership of your ideas and of your work. And these ideas have really just been embedded within the culture of education ever since. So what does this mean to you? That's really the question of today. So because of this long-standing emphasis on honesty and honest academic work and the exchange of intellectual ideas, many colleges and universities have embraced this, as part of their identity. It's part of their makeup and their tradition. And when you attend an institution like Suffolk, like all of you are, there is that expectation that you also uphold, these same principles in all aspects of your life, not just your academic life, but basically all aspects of your life on campus. So I guess the big question is, how do you know what academic standards or policies you need to be mindful of during your time as a student? And this part can sometimes be a little bit confusing. I'll be honest, it's a little bit confusing. Because even though the university has, this set group of rules, this set standard that lists out everything that students should and should not do, these rules regarding academic honesty can sometimes be interpreted differently. And these can be interpreted differently across different cultures, different backgrounds. Those all come into play. So, for example, something that might be considered or viewed as academically honest behavior here in the United States might not be the norm in a different part of the world. It might not be somebody else's reality. And you may find out, that you're being asked to follow a different set of standards at Suffolk than what you might have been used to when you were pursuing your academics in your home country. And I think one piece that I do want to stress about this, and it's really important, is that these differences in academic standards are not questions of morality. It's not a debate of which education system is right, and which one is wrong, or which one works better. But, because you are now being held to that Suffolk standard, it's just really important that you know exactly what is expected of you, during your time here. And that's really what the whole point of today is to just give you an overview of what those expectations are. So I think a really good place for students to start is taking a look at the student handbook. And the student handbook is available on the website. It is a really helpful document that outlines what is and isn't allowed when it comes to academic work. And it also lists some potential sanctions, or things that can happen if a student was to violate certain parts of the academic policies. So if you have not read it, which I'm hoping everybody has, but if not, I would definitely encourage you to review it at some point. A round of applause to the students that have, familiarized themselves. But it's something that I really do think can help you. So that I think is a great place for you to start, is to just get your hands on that handbook, start to go through some of those policies and familiarize yourself. And I will include the link to the student handbook before we end so that you know exactly where to find it and where you can see this information. All right. So now that we know where academic honesty comes from, and why it's important, I want to spend some time talking about what exactly it is. So what is academic honesty in the American university setting? In the US, honest work is produced when a student makes a commitment to 3 things. And the first thing you can see right on my screen. So honest work happens when students use their own ideas, meaning that their work is representative of their own beliefs, their own ideas, and their own thoughts. And when they say, that they did the work themselves, or that something was a product of their research or their time, that they actually did those things by themselves. And they didn't consult, other works without citing those pieces. That does bring me over to my second point. So the second one is that honest work happens when students give credit to the work of others. So when they rely on someone else's work, or refer to it in their paper or in their assignment, that they cite the research appropriately, and they give the credit to the scholars that are responsible for doing the work. They're not usually misleading others into thinking that another person's work is their own. And lastly, honest work happens when students present research materials fairly and truthfully. So that's true whether it involves research, whether it involves data or the writings of other scholars in the field. It's important that whatever a student is presenting, that it's truthful and that it's an accurate representation of the findings. So if you've ever found yourself, in a situation where you're questioning whether or not something might be a potential violation of Suffolk's academic honesty policy, you can start, the place to start is by asking yourself, these three questions. Are these my original ideas? Did I come up with these? Are these of my own thinking? If not, did I give credit to the original scholar when needed? Did I cite them? Did I give them credit and acknowledge them for their work? And have I presented this work honestly and truthfully? Okay, so have I represented it for all that it is? And not misled anyone with the data in any way. If you can confidently answer yes to each of these three questions, then you're likely moving in a really good direction. And that's likely something that would be considered to be, academically honest behavior. So now that we've covered, something that's a little bit more general, those are more general questions that you can ask. Let's focus on some more focused examples of academic misconduct and what this could look like. So the first one that I have on my list is cheating. So I think almost everybody in the room at some point, has witnessed or knows what cheating is. But cheating is the unauthorized use of information, the unauthorized use of materials or devices that give a student an unfair advantage when they're completing their assignments or their academic activities. So an example of cheating that we can use might be a student using a cheat sheet during a final exam. So say that they have their answers, written out on that cheat sheet, but they haven't been given permission to use it. This is not an open book exam. That would be an example of what cheating could look like in an academic setting. The next one is plagiarism, which I think this one is a little bit more common with college students. Not because of anything malicious, and we'll talk about this later, but because sometimes they just don't know how to properly cite. So sometimes it's accidental. But plagiarism is when students use other people's words, other people's ideas, or other people's data without citing, quoting, or referencing that author, appropriately. And a lot of times, if you don't cite correctly, then it's tough for someone who's reading your work or looking at your assignment to know what ideas were yours and what ideas were someone else's. So an example of this could be, if a student referenced an article in their final paper, let's say it was a 10-page final paper, but they didn't properly cite the researcher with the article that they used. So that could be an example of how plagiarism can, happen in an academic setting. This next one is unauthorized collaboration. So unauthorized collaboration can occur when students upload or share course content and materials with somebody else without permission. So it's kind of exactly what it looks like. It's when people don't have permission, it's unauthorized, but they're collaborating, they're working together. So an example of this, could be just that, a group of students working on a take-home test together without the permission of the professor. Okay, because the professor did not explicitly tell the students that they're allowed to work together on this assignment, then it's considered, academic dishonesty. And on the right side, I have a few more examples of what this could look like. So the use of unauthorized electronic devices, I think this one's a little bit more self-explanatory, but it's when students use a piece of technological information during an assignment. It could be during a test, it could be during a presentation. That was not authorized. It was not permitted by the professor for that student to be using that in that moment. So an example of this might be, if you had a cell phone under your desk during an exam, or if you were taking an online test and you had the test up in one window and you had answers or the internet open on the other. That would be an example of an unauthorized electronic device. And I have two more. This one I think often surprises people. Some people don't necessarily know what this one is, but I'm going to take some time, to explain it. And that's self-plagiarism. So self-plagiarism happens when a student submits an assignment that is the same or very similar to a past paper that they submitted for another class. You might hear students refer to this as recycling a paper, and it's just that. It's taking something that existed at one point, and you're recycling it like you might recycle a can to turn that in for another professor to receive credit. And the very last one that I have is fabrication or falsification of data. So creating false or fake information from an original source or author is considered to be, fabrication. It's falsifying the data. It's basically when you're taking information and you're changing it or altering it without permission. So an example of this, might be if you were, let's say, changing data that you collected for a research project so that the data fits better within your paper, or might be better when it comes to arguing your side of the argument. So does anyone have, before I continue, I know that was a lot of information. Does anyone have any questions about any of these things before I continue? You're welcome to use the chat if you'd like. You can also speak out. I do have the chat open on my side, so questions are welcome at all times. All right. So then let's continue a little bit more. So on this slide, we're going to talk about plagiarism. We're going to circle back to this concept of plagiarism. And again, we already covered that plagiarism is using other people's words or ideas or data without referencing, the original author appropriately. Okay, so you're failing to give credit where credit is due to the person who did the work. So on this slide, we're going to discuss three types of plagiarism that tends to be common among college students. And I'll talk about why some of these things tend to be common. The first one is when students fail to cite quotations or ideas from a source. Okay, so this might be when a writer doesn't make an effort to acknowledge the sources that they've used. They use, the thoughts and ideas of the original author, but they don't cite them. And by failing to cite this information, the reader doesn't know, the difference between the writer's original thoughts, so what actually came from the person who wrote the paper, and the work of the authors, which is problematic and would be considered plagiarism. The second common type of plagiarism is when students fail to put a source's language in quotation marks. Okay, so these quotation marks have a really important purpose. So quotation marks tell the reader what text was taken directly from another source. So if you were to take something from another source and you fail to cite them, you're basically, or if you fail to put them in quotation marks, you are basically saying that those are your words. Even if you reference the author at some other point, you're not acknowledging that those words that should have been in a quotation were spoken or written from someone else. And that's the part that's really problematic here, is because we want to give credit to the person who actually did, write that sentence or speak those words. And the last one is failing to use your own words in summaries or paraphrases. And I think a lot of students struggle with summaries and paraphrases because they do have some similar qualities. The biggest difference between summaries and paraphrasing is that a summary is a brief statement that describes the main points, but it's much shorter, it's briefer. Where a paraphrase is when you simply reword a written work by somebody else. So it's usually not as short as a summary, but you do have to go to reword in order to keep the original author's thoughts. Okay, so oftentimes it's not because students are being malicious. When these types of plagiarism incidents occur, it's just because sometimes students don't know, how to summarize and how to paraphrase properly. Regardless of the difference between the two, anytime you copy and paste sections of text rather than paraphrasing or summarizing those in your own words, it's problematic. And a good rule of thumb, when you're working on really any paper or any assignment, is to really just try and avoid copying and pasting full text into your document. Okay, so if we can avoid, I know it's tempting to copy and paste text, it will probably serve you well in the long run. Because even if you have the best intentions, and you mean to go back and kind of, summarize or paraphrase that text, sometimes it just leads students down a slippery slope that could potentially end in plagiarism. So I think a really good thing to just get in the habit of is to just not copy and paste things, from the internet or copy down word from word sources, unless you plan on citing it appropriately. So this slide really gets at the point that I was talking before, where not all instances of plagiarism in the college setting is deliberate. Oftentimes, like I mentioned, it's not malicious. This is not done on purpose by the student. They don't realize that sometimes they're even doing anything that's against the university's academic misconduct policy. Okay, sometimes they just don't know. Sometimes there are instances of plagiarism that are more intentional or are more deliberate. And these tend to be, cases that are more serious. Not that other cases are not, but these tend to be the ones that sometimes will result in a more serious academic misconduct violation. Okay, and if you look on, the left-hand side, it lists some of these that are considered to be, more deliberate. So one of them is rewriting from books or articles. That is very similar to the next one, where you're copying and pasting from web pages and online writing, because you're just taking the information and either rewriting it or copying it. Okay, you're not summarizing it, you're not paraphrasing it, you're not reading it to learn about it and then putting it in your own words. It's deliberate because you are literally copying and pasting from the web sources and just adding it into your paper. Okay. The other one that I see that's on here is buying and downloading or borrowing a paper. So I think a lot of people can probably tell, why that's problematic. Mainly because you're turning in a written work or you're turning in a project that is not yours. You didn't really have any say in what was being said. You didn't do the work or the research. You are just turning in something that actually belongs to somebody else. Okay, so more often than not, those are considered to be more deliberate. The ones that are sometimes accidental are on the right-hand side. And these are a lot of those instances that I already talked about, where it's really just students aren't sure when and how to cite. Students might not know the difference or how to paraphrase and summarize. Students also might not know what common knowledge is. And I do have a slide a little bit later to talk about the idea of common knowledge a little bit further. And students Recycling an old paper, I think, is one that, some people could think is deliberate. But I think with this one, a lot of students think sometimes that because they wrote that paper, because that paper was theirs or is theirs, that it would not be considered plagiarism when you turn it into another class. And that's just not the case. Usually you do need permission from the professor in order to turn in an assignment that you've already done or have already submitted. So since my goal today is to help us, avoid instances of potential, accidental plagiarism, we are going to spend some time talking about citing the appropriate sources when you do include to use these sources in your assignments. Okay, so this slide is really focusing on telling us what information you should cite. Okay, and really the rule of thumb is that you should always cite any other works that are not yours that you've included. So I know that we hit upon a lot of these already, but this includes any direct quotes that you might use, any direct quotes, any statistics or very specific facts that you might find and want to use in your paper or in your research. Tables, graphs, and diagrams. This kind of falls in that same column as those statistics or the specific facts. You would want to make sure that you cite anything that you use like that is somebody else's work. And basically anything that you end up summarizing or paraphrasing. Okay, because again, that is ultimately somebody else's thoughts. You're just summarizing and paraphrasing those in your own words. So there is an exception, to this rule of the things that you should cite, and that's the idea of common knowledge. Okay, and I'm not sure how many people are familiar about this term, common knowledge, but common knowledge is basically information that your reader already knows or could easily go out and find themselves. Okay, so this isn't new pieces of information. It's something that a lot of people are already familiar with. Doesn't mean everybody's familiar with it, but I would say it would be easy to find. Oops, let me go back. The other thing that helps to know if something's common knowledge is if you've seen it in several sources. So if you're doing your research and you see that a concept or a topic comes across in lots of different works and there's no cite, chances are, that's a good, suggestion that that is common knowledge. So an example of this is what I have on the screen. So a good example of common knowledge is that Neil Armstrong was the first man to walk on the moon in 1969. Okay, if people in this room, didn't know that, that's certainly okay. I did have to go back and refresh myself on the year. But if you do look at lots of research that are out there, if you read books or you go online, chances are you're going to find this information readily available. So that's why this technically would be considered to be, common knowledge. And since it is common knowledge, if you were to put this in a paper, you would not need to cite this. So something is no longer common knowledge if it fits one of these three things. So if the information appears only in a few sources, so say, you've seen it once or twice somewhere, you think that there's a chance, but there's also a lot of articles on the topic where you haven't seen that information be present. If it only appears in a few sources, it may not be considered common knowledge, and it's probably good for you to cite it. The other thing that makes something not common knowledge is if it's very, very specific. Okay, so statistics would be a good example of that, or something that's controversial, where there's multiple viewpoints on that same topic. So if the information that you are including in a work ends up checking one of these bullets, then it's not considered to be, in the category of common knowledge, and you would want to make sure that you cite it appropriately when you can. One thing I will say, is that I really do recognize that a lot of these rules can be confusing, especially if this is some of the first time that you've seen citations or this type of content. So I think, again, another really good rule of thumb, if you're not sure about whether something should be cited, that you ask. And you can ask your professor, that's always a really great choice. Your professor will certainly tell you, whether or not something should be or shouldn't be. You can also make an appointment with a writing tutor. So if you wanted to do that, if you're not sure, make an appointment. All of our writing tutors are trained in this area to be able to pick out, what information should be cited and what's not. And they're also very familiar with the process of creating citations. So they're a good resource for you as well. Okay. So these are just some tips to help you. As you go through the writing process. Writing is really hard work. So what I will say is that you want to be kind. You want to be as kind as possible to your future self. And you want to try to do yourself little favors along the way as you're going through your writing process. So the first thing that I recommend, or that we tend to recommend in the CLAS, is that you cite sources as you take notes or create drafts of their paper. Okay, so taking notes on your citations will save you time and energy when it comes to putting the paper together. So you will have the research condensed all to one place. You're not going to have to go searching for all of those articles that you used or those really great quotes. You will have everything right there. So that by the time that you're ready to go ahead and create this paper, you can avoid going back and forth trying to find all of these things all over again. And it will definitely make your life a little bit easier. The other thing that we tend to recommend is to create a reference page entry every time that you find or include a source. So if you find a source that you like and you choose to use it in a paper, a good thing to do is to just start that reference page and just start adding those sources as you include them. You can continue to add those, as much or as little. You can always go back at the end and kind of cut out what you don't need. You can clean it up, but at least, again, this will save you lots of time, as you will have done a lot of the hard work ahead of time in advance before that final paper or that final paragraph is even written. The other thing that I would recommend is to use quotation marks in notes and drafts. So adding quotation marks in your drafts helps you to remember that the information that you've written down was a direct quote from somewhere. Okay, so that way you know exactly how to cite it when it comes time. Sometimes I think what we do when we find a quote that we like is we just, quickly write it down. But if you don't put those quotation marks around it, you might go back 2 weeks later when you're ready to write that part of your paper, and you may not even remember that that was a direct quote from somebody else. Okay, so it could potentially get into a gray area where you might start to not cite that properly. You're not citing that as a quote, and that obviously can start to get problematic. Our next tip is to read the full text before you summarize or paraphrase. Okay, so reading the full text, obviously it takes time. You don't necessarily have to read the entire text depending on what you're doing and what your research process looks like. But you should read a good amount of it so that you can take time to consider what the main takeaways in that text are before you attempt to summarize or paraphrase, what was being said. Having the time to just sit with the text and really read it, makes it easier for you to describe in your own words what you've read, and what this paragraph really is saying. And that way you don't fall into that trap of just finding something that you like in the text, copying and pasting it, and then trying to, alter it in a way that makes sense for your paper. And the last one that I have on this slide is just checking quotations, checking paraphrases and summaries against the original work. I don't know if anyone does this. I have started doing it in recent years, and it really kind of has just been a lifesaver for me. So what I recommend is just putting the original work and your paper, side by side, And just go back and forth and just double check to make sure that you followed the right procedure, that you've quoted the work correct, that you're not missing any parts, or that the quote is actually a quote, and that you paraphrased or summarized the idea properly without copying any of the sections. So if you can look at those things side by side, you might be able to pick up on some of those things that you might not have should you not have taken the time to do this piece. And again, these aren't things that you necessarily have to do. Okay, so your professor's not going to probably check up and make sure that you've done these things. But if you do get in the habit of doing them, it will likely save you a lot of time. It can save you a lot of energy and some potential frustration, when you're going ahead and putting those final touches on your paper. So at this point, I am just going to kind of switch gears a little bit and really just start with a game. And this game is really just meant to review, a lot of the information that we just went through, because I do know, that it's quite a bit. So what's going to happen is I am going to put a list of statements in the chat. And each item on the list is a scenario or something that a student might do in an academic or a class setting. Okay. And I want you to look at each scenario. So you're just going to, read the sentence and figure out what category you think each of those actions belongs in. So does it belong in intentional misconduct? Is it an example of intentional misconduct? Does it belong in accidental misconduct? So maybe the student didn't mean to do it, but it's still something that would violate the academic honesty policies? Or is the action considered to be acceptable? Is it totally fine for students to do? Is it authorized collaboration? Do we not see any issues with the student engaging in that behavior? Okay, so I am going to go ahead and put that in the chat, so you will see that in a moment. Okay, so I did just send that. So 2, 3, 4, 5. It looks like there's 5 different scenarios. Okay, and just to use this as an example before I let you actually go ahead and start working on this, I will put the first one up on the screen. So the first one that you see on this list is buying a paper. Okay, so think about, what that means, and then try to decide what category, buying a paper would go into. You don't have to tell me now. I am going to give you probably about, I would say, 3 minutes or so to just go through those 5 statements and try to identify where they might be. And then we'll come back as a group and we'll quickly go through those together before we move on. So it's just about 1:41, so I'll stop everybody at 1:44. Everybody, just about 1 more minute. Does anybody need more time to make it through that list? It's okay if you didn't get through all of them too. We are going to just quickly go through those 5 examples together, but does anyone have any questions? Does anyone need more time? All right. Then let's start by looking at this buying a paper one. What category do we think that buying a paper belongs in? And you can certainly use the chat. You also can, reach out if you want to share your answer that way. Either method is appropriate. So do we think buying a paper is intentional misconduct? Do we think it's something that might have been done accidentally? Or is it something that's acceptable? Is that something that students are allowed to do? All right, I'm not seeing any guesses come in unless I've missed them. So I will just kind of go in and we can just talk about this one a little bit more. So buying a paper, buying, downloading, borrowing, anything like that is considered to be intentional misconduct. So it would fall under the intentional misconduct category. And that's ultimately because it's plagiarism. The student that's turning in the paper that is not theirs, and they're passing that paper off as their own work. Okay, so that would be an incident of academic misconduct. I do just see the chat. Oh, thank you. I do see that somebody just put that in. All right, so does everybody understand why this technically would be intentional misconduct? Why a student purposely knew what they were doing when they bought this paper and they turned it into their professor knowing that it wasn't theirs? All right, so let's go ahead and move on to the next one for the sake of time. So the next one is not citing common knowledge. We talked a little bit about common knowledge earlier. So does anyone want to share what they thought this would fall under, which category? And again, you're welcome to use the chat if that's easier. You also can unmute yourself, and I'm totally open to that as well.
I don't want to take away from the students, but I would think it'd be accidental.
Accidental. So let's see.
Or actually, I'm sorry. Acceptable. I apologize.
No worries. No worries. I know they're very close. Close words. So this would be something that's acceptable. So not citing common knowledge is that exception to basically if your readers already know the information, okay, so if they can easily find it or they know that information already, then it isn't something that someone needs to cite. So that was that example of Neil Armstrong that we had looked at earlier. So let's move on to the next one. So how about copying and pasting from web pages and online sources? What would we consider this to be? Any ideas?
Okay, can you put the choice in the chat? Because
for sure, you can absolutely use the chat. Don't see it coming through yet, but I'll give you an extra second to use it. So intentional misconduct. Let's see. Yep, that's exactly what it is. So anytime you're copying and pasting from a web page and an online source, that's considered intentional misconduct, because again, it's just that action of copying and pasting. You know that information isn't something that you came up with, and by failing to cite it without crediting the source, that would be considered plagiarism. So I do have a couple, you know, other slides that I do want to get to, and I do want to be aware of the time. So I am going to skip the other 2 examples. And I can leave the answers to those in the chat if you didn't get to see them. But I do want to spend some time just talking about, you know, now that we know when we're supposed to cite, this next part will kind of talk about, you know, how you can go about making sure that you're citing appropriately using APA and MLA. So these next few slides are really going to offer some helpful tips on how to properly cite using APA and MLA. So again, you know, citations are necessary because they help give credit to the original author. Okay, so that's the whole reason why these exist, is so that we can give credit where credit is due. So APA format is the first one that you see on the screen. And we typically use APA format for technical works. So this is usually in the social science disciplines where APA is most often found. And it helps us cite things like academic journals and technical reports. And when you are directly quoting a work, so if you see those quotes on the screen, if you're directly quoting it in APA, you should follow the author date method of in-text citation. And I have an example of this on the screen. So this means that the author's last name should appear in the text alongside the year that the source was published. And if you are directly quoting, like we are in this example, then you should include the page number at the end in parentheses, like you see. So if we look at this example, you can see that the authors are at the beginning of the sentence. So that would be Horn and Staker. I've highlighted those in yellow. And to the right of it, in green, you'll see the year that the work was published, and that was 2011. And at the very, very end of the quotation, you can see that the information was taken from page number 4 of the work. So MLA looks a little bit different, MLA format. So MLA is typically used for papers and projects in the arts and humanities disciplines. Okay, so those might be like history and philosophy or art. And these are really helpful when you need to cite things like, paintings, books, poems, things of that nature. MLA format follows the author page method of in-text citation. So unlike APA that uses author date, MLA uses author page. This means that the author's last name and the page numbers must appear in the text, which you can see right in this example. You can see it in the parentheses that are highlighted, J118. The author's name is J, and 118 is the page number where this was taken from. And just so that you know, when you're creating an in-text citation in MLA, the author's name can also appear in another part of the sentence. It doesn't have to appear at the end like it does here. You can see sort of an example of that where it has the name Gregory J in the beginning. You would just need to be able to incorporate that somewhere in the sentence as opposed to at the end. Both are acceptable. On this next slide, we have a sample APA paraphrase citation. So before we were looking at direct quotations, and this one is more of how to cite a paraphrase. So in APA, if you're paraphrasing an idea from somebody else's work, you only have to make reference to the author and the year of publication, which you can see on the slide. Okay, so in this example, we see that the writer references the author, who's Watson, and the year of publication, which was 2008. APA guidelines encourage the page range for a summary or paraphrase, especially since it will help the reader. So if the reader found what you put in your paper to be really interesting, the page number helps them to know, okay, I'm going to go to this book on my own. I'm going to look at page 15 and I can find out more, where I can see where the source got its information. So sometimes that's really helpful, but it's not always required. You can also see that I highlighted the word reported. So in yellow, you'll see the word reported on the slide. That's not, well, I guess it's part of the sentence, but I only highlighted that because I wanted to point out something that I'm going to show you on the next slide. So this is a helpful tool. I think this is really something that a lot of students might find to be handy. So if you are paraphrasing and you're struggling to come up with the words to paraphrase appropriately, a chart like this might be something that would be extremely useful to you. Okay, so you can find very similar charts like this verb one online. There's lots of resources out there that can, help you to find other verbs. But again, this is really helpful if you're just struggling to figure out what verb or what words you want to use in your paraphrase. It's a painless process. It just takes a minute to look at this chart, but hopefully it might make your process of paraphrasing a little bit easier. So I did just want to make sure that that was included as well. All right, so we only have a few minutes left. So I'll just talk a little bit about what some acceptable forms of collaboration are. So we started hinting at this, a little bit during our misconduct game, of when collaboration is allowed and when it might not be. The times where they're acceptable is when it's explicitly stated in a group project. Okay, so if your professor, assigns a group project and they've explicitly stated or they told you that you're allowed to work with other people, then that's a way that you would know whether or not you're allowed to, work together. In-class peer review is another example of when collaboration can occur and when it's allowed to occur. So this tends to happen, when you're working with other students in the class. You might be sharing your writing or a project, and you're really, the purpose is to be able to get feedback from the other students in your class. And this is something that's really encouraged, and it would not be a violation of academic misconduct. Another good one is seeking help during office hours. So if you do find that you need help or you do have questions about the assignment, definitely check to see if your professor has office hours, because I always do think that it's better to just show up and ask or make an appointment and ask than to just run with it, if you're not sure, and potentially run the risk of an academic misconduct violation. And the last one is tutoring at the CLAS, which I know I've spoken about, in the beginning, but we really do encourage you, to come and work with the tutors. All of our tutors are trained in helping you maintain ownership of your own work. So they are really familiar with citations, when things need to be cited, how to make sure that they are not, putting you in jeopardy of academic misconduct in any way, shape, or form. So they would be a really great person to kind of run some of these questions by if you're unsure. And that would not be considered to be academic misconduct. So that is that. So my last couple slides that I'm just going to wrap up on and leave you with is that there's a lot of really great resources out there. The 3 that are listed on this page are just a few of them. But these are the ones that I've used quite a bit during my work. And we also tell students in the CLAS to use and have copies handy. The first one is the Purdue Online Writing Lab. So I would definitely check this out if you need assistance with any type of MLA or APA citation. There's a lot of rules, when it comes to citing. So it's not something that you necessarily need to have memorized, but you can use resources like the Purdue Online Writing Lab to help you and support you through the process. And they have a lot of really great resources on there. The other 2 are offered through APA Style. So there's apastyle.org, which really just focuses on APA, and the APA Style Publication Manual. So if you're a hard copy person, like I know probably a lot of you are, that's a really great book. It pretty much got me through, my undergrad and my graduate degree. So I definitely encourage you to check these out. Chances are they're probably in the library if you want to take a look. And the other piece that's new, well, it's not new. We have a writing resources page on the CLAS website that also has a lot of helpful writing resources for students. What is new is the vanity link that you see on my page. So if you go ahead and go to suffolk.edu/CLAS/writing-help, that will bring you right to our writing support page. I also will go ahead and put that link in the chat at the end in case you want to take some time and browse, the different resources that are on this page. And I don't think it would be a workshop on academic honesty if we didn't take, a minute to just reference the sources that we use to put this together. So these are just some of the materials that we use to create this presentation. And again, a lot of these are those helpful resources that I just spoke about through OWL at Purdue or APA style. And I do have one final thing. This really wraps up the content that I have, but I was hoping that students might be able to take a quick survey. These surveys are surveys that we give after every academic skills workshop. They are really helpful in helping us receive information, helping us get your feedback, so that as we design new workshops, we're designing workshops that make sense for you as students, using content that you really want to see or that you have an interest or need for. So I'll also go ahead and put that in the chat in just a moment. If you could fill it out at some point, it doesn't have to be right now. We would really, really appreciate that feedback. So before I end this, it's just about 2 o'clock. Does anyone have any questions about any of these things? I know we went through quite a bit, but I'm happy to certainly answer questions. And if there's questions I can't answer, I can refer you over to the Writing Center or to somebody on staff.
And we have a soft copy of that contact. It might be help us so much to make sure that we will not did any plagiarism. It's many things that will pass for sure.
Yeah, there are. I will be the first one to admit there are so many parts and there are so many things that you have to take into consideration. But I will stress, it's not something that you need to have memorized. If you can consult these resources, when you're writing a paper, you can open up these style guides or these books and really use them as a resource, then that's really great. You don't have to have everything memorized, and the writing tutors will work with you to make sure that you are doing these things appropriately. So there's people to support you, because I know it's a lot.
Okay.
What I am going to do, if there aren't any questions, I do just want to make sure I have time to put those resources in the chat. So the first two, that I'm going to put in is the student handbook. So if you haven't had a chance to take a look at the student handbook, I really would encourage you to do so. And the second one is that writing resources page that's offered through the CLAS. And the second one that I'm going to go ahead and just paste in is the survey link. Right, and at this point, I am going to go ahead and just stop this recording because I just realized it is still going.